Hello and welcome to this very special episode of Checking In with the Ukulele Sessions. So, what's going on here, you might wonder? Well, Christopher Davis Shannon, the wonderful multi-instrumentalist and ukulele player who runs the Checking In With series, he'd approached me to appear on it, and at the same time I approached him to appear on the Ukulele Sessions because I've been a fan of his for a long time. He plays that kind of swing jazz music that I really love, and he plays it so well. So we thought, rather than do two separate episodes, we'd merge them together, and hence we've come up with Checking In With the Ukulele Sessions for this one-off special. So in the first bit I interview Christopher, and in the second bit, Christopher interviews me, and you can find out all about us both. In between that, we thought it would be really fun if we both played the same piece, because we both have very, very different styles. I mean, I'm a real admirer of Christopher's playing. You know, he's very, very fluid in his playing. He's also a great singer, and you can tell from the other instruments that he plays, you know, that he plays the double bass as well, and many other instruments. All these wonderful influences coming together. But we thought it'd be fun if we tackled the same piece. So we picked a piece that we both really love called Autumn Leaves. And it really is quite interesting to see how we both tackle it so differently, the same piece. So sit back, enjoy this special episode of Checking In With the Ukulele Sessions with Christopher Davis Shannon and myself, Paul Mansell. Hi Chris, it is lovely to see you.
Hey, Paul, it's lovely to see you as well. How you doing today, man?
Yeah, I'm doing really, really well, thank you. I wondered if we could start by chatting a little bit about your childhood and how you got into music, Christopher.
Well, I mean, I was born into it to an extent. My mother's a professional musician. She's actually a retired public school music teacher now. She sings and plays piano. My brother's also a fabulous pianist and singer. And so I was a little bit stuck. We grew up with a piano in the home, so I got to play around on that. And then I took up clarinet when I was about 8, 9 years old. And that was my primary instrument for years, were reed instruments, until I was about 13, 14 or so. I picked up guitar because, you know, we all have to start a rock band when we're in high school. It's a rite of passage in America to start a very terrible garage band, which we fit that bill, but we were entertaining. And I still, you know, credit that band that I played with in my teenage years for learning a heck of a lot about stage presence and performance, not so much about music. But you know, as you know, especially at like festivals when you're playing theaters and such, that's just as important as playing music itself. So, you know, certainly not time wasted and time hanging out with my best friends. So I was the guitar player that ended up swapping to bass because everyone needs a bass player. And if you can play guitar, you can play bass. Don't ever say that to a bass player, but as a bass player, I can say that. So I continued there, and I decided, you know, music was what I wanted to do with my life and go to university to study that. But I did not want to play clarinet for the rest of my life. That seemed terrible to me. Which actually one of the things I've done over the pandemic is I went out and bought a new clarinet. Well, actually, an old clarinet. It's from the 30s, and started taking that up again because I actually missed playing reed instruments so much. I had in it about 10 years. So I went out and bought an upright bass when I was 17 years old or so, and it took about 6 months to learn that, and then auditioned for university, and you know, went to college and learned how to play bass.
Fantastic. That's
to be honest, the bar for upright bass players is lower than for other instruments. So I was lucky. You know, so I grew up playing a host of instruments, and music itself. My mother was in musical theater when I was a child. It was always something that was around the house. And I grew up on a real steady diet of like Broadway show tunes and Nat King Cole with a little side of the Beatles in there, as is obligatory. But yeah, up until about 5, 6 years ago, upright bass was my primary instrument, what I taught, what I played, how I toured. And then a few years ago, my brother, as I mentioned, is also a musician, as is his wife. And their 2 young daughters that were 4 and 7, I believe, at the time, wanted to pick up an instrument. So they called me and asked what would be an appropriate one. They had a piano in the home, but they wanted to try something else. So I suggested ukulele on a whim, which we'd always had one laying around the house. My father had gotten my mother this Mouseketeers ukulele, Oscar Schmidt one. Not the best way. She still has it. I play it every time I go over to her house. So I'd play around with it occasionally and figure out the chords that could transfer from guitar. And I said, how about ukulele for the girls? There'll be a nice easy one for them. It's not as stressful as guitar to press down the strings, and they'll get a sense of harmony and gratification really fast, being able to play a few chords right off the bat. So I went out, bought them ukuleles, and taught them for a little bit, and then I kind of fell in love with the instrument, because before this I had thought it was just a ukulele. It's just a tiny guitar that you play. And then I ran across old videos of people like Royce Beck and George Formby and Art Fowler and all these, and Ukulele Ike, my gosh, Jiminy Cricket himself, and watched these right hand techniques. I said, there's something here. This is actually a completely different instrument, and I should learn it as if I'm learning a completely different instrument. So I went back and kind of started from scratch there, because I wanted to make sure that I did not play it like a tiny guitar as I had been doing previously, and give it the respect that it deserves. And now that's pretty much all I do is play ukulele at this point. I tour with a rockabilly band, playing upright bass. I do jazz casuals around town and such. I still do play a lot of bass, but vast majority of my work is now ukulele, and it's much easier to travel with than the upright bass, so I'm not going to complain about that.
Yeah, I can imagine. And how did you go about teaching yourself? Did you have lessons? Did you get books? Did you just watch videos? How did you go about that?
It was mostly watching videos of the old masters, of Smack, of Formby, figuring, and the joy of YouTube, you can slow down some of those things. And from there, once you figure out what those techniques are, because a lot of them seem so mystical at first, and then you watch it really close, you go, oh, it's just a 3-stroke Braciato roll. That's all Smack is doing half the time. We steal so many techniques from, especially Baroque guitar, Renaissance guitar techniques, which set me down that rabbit hole, which is a blast for me, to adapt a lot of those techniques. And also flamenco guitar, we steal a lot from there. So I studied the right hand of people who play Baroque guitar and flamenco guitar, as well as ukulele, and a fair amount of cavaquinho as well, to get some of those rhythmic patterns under my fingers, the other offshoot of the macheta. And from there, really just transcription of the old records is how I learned. And that's my method for learning most instruments, is find the best people on there and figure out what the heck they're doing.
Wow, that's brilliant. That takes some skill to do. I'm starting to get a feel as to how you've landed where you are on the ukulele, because I'm a real admirer of your playing. It's very different to my playing, in that I generally can't get my head around what you're doing and how you're doing it. And I love it. And I think that's what I see your style as, kind of old school with a new twist. Is that how you see it?
That's what I try for. I'm trying to take those techniques that were so popular in the swing and ragtime era. As I said, Ukulele Ike and Royce Beck especially had a lot going on. And I think, if I mentioned Formby a lot, and a lot of Americans still don't know who he is. I'm working on that, because I think he actually had a lot to contribute on the instrument side. He's known so much as a performer and actor, but he actually did a lot of really interesting things on uke that I think can be taken quite a bit further. And you see people like Andy Eastwood doing similar things today, taking Formby's techniques and really propelling them into the new world. And I try to stay around that. I don't want to be a recreation of those old players. It's been done. I love the style. It's a blast for me to play, but that's not me. I want to do something. So you've probably noticed I do a lot of campanella techniques in my play, which like Smack would not dream of doing something like that. But I think, the first person I saw doing that was Sam Muir doing campanella on there. And then of course I found John King after that, and incredible. Playing by, you can work in all of these modern techniques. Campanella is not modern by any stretch. It's another old guitar technique. We could borrow a lot of these things, and they really complement the instrument well. So I've done my best just to build up all these different techniques, pulling from different places to create sort of my own style, but with a firm foundation on those early mainland US players from the 20s and 30s.
Yeah, I think that's the great thing about the ukulele, because I think if you play guitar, if you play classical guitar, you tend to stick to one style, and there's kind of, in inverted commas, right and wrong ways to do it. With the ukulele,
Yes.
I love all these different styles that you can bring in. Funny enough, I noticed the other day you had on your great show Matthew Quilliam, and he's another guy who is a bit similar playing style to you, actually. Merging quite a few different styles. I pick up a little bit of Django Reinhardt in your playing.
there is a huge obsession there. I do play bass and rhythm guitar in a Manouche jazz band on the side. That is one thing I do. And my quartet, which unfortunately we've not played as a quartet in an entire year now, is me on uke, doubling on guitar, but I play all Piedmont style guitar, alternating bass, thumb, Atkins style playing is what I play on guitar, as well as tenor guitar. And I have a violinist, upright bass, and a gypsy jazz guitar player. And that rhythm, the La Pompe, is everything to me. That's what makes people dance, and that's what I want in music. I take a lot from Django, where we've actually been talking about bringing my guitar player on for a lesson on my channel to really truly adapt La Pompe properly, because he's a true master of the style. I'll never be on his level as far as guitar. He has devoted his life to that style of playing, which it takes. It's such a complex style, and it's such a stark contrast from so many other things that we see. It stands, like Eddie Lang, which is really what propelled Django to do a lot of what he did, or those early American guitar players. But I'm hoping that we're going to have a big lesson soon on adapting a lot of those Manouche jazz techniques to ukulele, because I think it actually suits the instrument rather well. And I think there's a lot more to explore there.
Yeah, I think there is something funny enough. Just before we started chatting, I was working on a version of Coquette, the Django Reinhardt. Working on a solo version of that. And there's something about
that song, if you play it in B flat chord melody on uke, it's perfect. Just B flat 6th chord with the open G, and you go down. Oh man, it's one of my favorite tunes from back then.
Yeah, I love it as well. I listen to it an awful lot. There's a great Django version with I can't remember if it's with Stefan Grappelli on violin, or whether it was when he'd moved to a chat with clarinet. I'm not sure. I think it's the violin version.
The later stuff, like the Rome Sessions, maybe, where you had the clarinet on there. Yeah,
after the war, I think.
There's a great, speaking of Coquette, there's a great so that tune was written in 26, I think. Okay. And in 25, Irving Berlin wrote a song called Coquette for a movie of the same name, which was just one of those lost songs. No one plays it really, but it's this beautiful waltz. You should check it out if you have a chance. There's only a few recordings out there. It's a totally different song, but same name, and then someone else capitalized on that name a year later with the tune that we all know.
Oh wow. I shall look out for that. Thank you. So moving on a bit from your sort of playing style, I wanted to talk about your songwriting and music writing. When you're sort of looking at writing a piece, be it sort of a song or an instrumental piece, what's your angle of attack? Do you sort of pick the uke up and do you noodle, or do you write it on a different instrument, or is it in your head? What's your sort of method of writing?
It depends a lot. The vast majority of the time, if I'm writing a song with lyrics, I have very different lyrics are first for me, and I feel like the music needs to suit the lyrics and the mood. So I actually, when I'm writing lyrical things, I generally start out with just free flowing thought on a page, not prose, not anything, and then I'll maybe find one line that I like and create an entire song off of that one little motif. And then I feel like if you write the prose, you get the kind of pentameter to get where it needs to sit rhythmically and let the lyrics speak for itself. As when I'm writing instrumental pieces, so actually when I studied at university, I did 6 semesters of classical composition along with upright bass. So I have a fair background in there, and that does inform a lot of what I do. But I try to keep mostly with, melody wins over everything. I always think back to the joys of Antonio Carlos Jobim, that he writes these beautiful melodies and then harmonizes them in ways that you would never dream of in a million years. And if you look at a lot of it on paper, you go, well, that's dumb. And then you hear something like Aguas de Marco that starts out on a dominant seventh chord over the seventh. And you're like, oh, that's a terrible, but the way that he resolves E major seventh in like the fourth bar, and you're just like, ingenious, because I feel like all he was doing was thinking about the melody, and harmony and everything else follows what a beautiful melody is doing. And there's a lot of different ways you can treat it. And I've actually done a number of rearrangements of like indie rock popular tunes in Jobium style harmony on guitar. I do like bright eyes, as if Tom Jobium had reharmonized it. So when it comes to instrumental writing, melody's everything, and a lot of that does come from my head, because I feel like each instrument causes me to play different idiomatic things. You know, be it whether I'm playing banjo or tenor guitar, regular guitar, piano, or clarinet, or uke. They all force me into a different melodic space. But a lot of my melodies come from when I'm just driving or walking around and singing to myself. And I think that's my like natural way of doing it. I go down, I get one motif, and then build upon that concept and see what comes out. And 9 times out of 10, it's terrible, and sometimes you get something nice.
Once you've got a melody in your head, you then start kind of basing chords behind it and bass notes, that kind of thing, triads, etc.
Yes. Yeah, so I go a lot. I mean, as a bass player, I've melody and then bass is next. So I think about how can we do a good like counter melody in the bass and make that logical, and then we'll deal with the rest of the harmony later, and then creating tension and all of that. So I think the overall harmony generally comes last. It's melody, bass, then fill in the blanks, and that could be a lot of different ways. If you have a C in the bass and an F in the melody, we've got a lot of choices for how we can harmonize something like that, depending on the mood you want to create.
Yeah, and in some ways it is challenging with the uke, isn't it? Especially if you're playing a reentrant. You've only really got the 2 octaves, so sometimes you're not going to come up with something like Bach, because your bass realistically to go in the opposite direction to do some counterpoint is really tricky on the uke.
Yes, unless you're playing low G, in which case you can get away with those things. And I only play reentrant. Well, I shouldn't say only. Occasionally I'll put a low G on there for fun, but almost entire. And that's one of the joys of ukulele to me, is that constraint of an octave and a half effective range, which is silly on any other instrument. You think of having that limited of a range, but it forces you to think about things completely differently. Because you think about bass as not. I never think about the inversions that I'm playing on uke, where on guitar, I'm very conscious of the chord inversions that I'm playing, because I have bass movement in there. Where in uke, I'm like, well, if I have a bass player, the bass player will fill in the blanks. I don't need to worry about this, which creates quite a bit of ambiguity, which my band just loves when I throw new tunes at them and they go, well, is that a diminished seventh, or is that a dominant 7 flat 9? I'm like, well, can't you hear it?
Yeah. Fantastic. So moving on a little bit, you recently released a fantastic book, the George Formby Handbook. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what the idea was behind it?
Sure. So I mentioned earlier, Formby came kind of early on in my uke journey. It's just been suggested to me by one of my students, actually, and I really fell in love with his right hand. The left hand, there's not a whole lot going on in there, but the right hand, and the first time I learned the split stroke, I was like, this is cool. And then I got a hand from a library in Hawaii of Ernest Cayet's first method book from 1913 or so, and he describes the same exact pattern in there. And it's also in Roy Smeck's first method book. And if you think about, the reentrant tuned uke kind of opens up that possibility of playing melodies from against the 2 outside strings. While other people did it early on, Formby was the one that perfected that. I mean, his variations and the way that he would displace the accents throughout these patterns and the way that he threw in triple strokes was like nothing anyone else was doing. And also just the way he would play with a dance band, when he'd take a solo, it was almost always what we call, like in traditional jazz, like a double time feel, right? Like you think he's playing straight eighth notes, but the band's in halftime behind him and he's doing all this straight stuff over a semi-swung bouncy rhythm, that early jazz, not quite swing sort of rhythm. So as I learned it and I transcribed a bunch of Formby's solos, and I said, I went out there and there are some great books on there. Dave Partington especially created a great book with transcriptions of so many of his solos in there. And I had never really seen it represented in a way that was easily digestible. It was like chord frames and do this thing over top, and Partington he had kind of created his own notation system for Formby, which I thought was ingenious that he did that. But me coming from my background, and I know that there's a lot of other people out there like me that play other instruments and are picking up uke, I want to see it notated in a way that's easily digestible for me or for a classical musician, someone that wants to understand these styles, because they, as you were saying earlier, some of that right hand stuff seems so crazy, but then when you see it on paper, you go, oh, is that it? Is that all it really is? And it was ingenious the way he did it. So my main mission was putting this down in a way that was accessible to all musicians out there, because it's sort of Formby was almost like a folk music idiom. His playing style was passed around the George Formby societies. There's so many great players out there in this style in the UK, but many of them learned by watching Formby or watching people who learned as children that Formby style. And I wanted to see it really put down in a different format, and especially for the American audience who just doesn't even know Formby exists for the most part. Unless you play ukulele, you have no idea who he was. He was such a hit in the UK, especially, instrumental in the war years, of course, with the films that he did for the military, and the little novelty tunes that he did were really important in UK history. But in America, that was nothing. And we didn't understand a lot of his humor as well. That's another issue with the divide here is British humor versus American humor, where we're not into the nuance as much. We would prefer a nice in your face dirty joke where he alludes to things. So I wanted to get it out of that folk music idiom and really truly be able to put down on paper and analyze what was going on, so that I could explain it in a way that musicians would be able to understand and thus hopefully incorporate it into their playing. Because a lot of people still think that Formby's methods are for playing Formby songs, and I've never played a Formby song live in my life. Again, the humor, I would feel absolutely ridiculous singing so many of those things, and so many of the tunes are dated as well. That goes for the American early jazz stuff too. Plenty of songs that we don't play from like Tin Pan Alley anymore as well, because they just don't work. But those right hand techniques, I think, are important, and something that we only really see on uke. Like I was working with a student on a samba piece a couple of weeks ago, and the split stroke is actually an amazing way to cavaquinho parts, because they're both really just dealing with how you treat the clave rhythm and the accents in there. I'm like, and Formby probably wasn't thinking about that, and nor were most of the musicians of the day thinking about what we think of, like all the different clave rhythms that we have. But that's effectively what Formby was doing, and thus it works really well in many jazz styles, in Latin styles, in all different ways. And I want to see more people using these techniques out there, even if they don't care about George Formby's music. I think it's important to the evolution of the instrument, and I think it's really important what Formby did for the instrument and how far he carried it.
Yeah, fantastic. It's great to see that formalized, and that's available as a download, isn't it, from your website?
It is, yes, and there is also a physical copy as well if you like paper, and there's a whole video series that goes around along with that, because it's certainly something that's very hard to understand by just looking at it on paper, because the way that he moved his right hand was very, very important. So there's videos breaking down every technique we talk about in the book.
Great. And that brings me succinctly on to your videos. Funnily enough, one of my favourite videos of yours is one of the ones about chord inversions, actually, because they're always fairly confusing. And I was struggling to explain it to a student once, and I happened upon your video about chord inversions, and I thought it was very clever the way you explained that. But something I wanted to discuss about your videos is they're always so stylish, sir. They really are, you know.
Thank you.
It's like if you just go on your website, the photos of you on your website, I instantly know what kind of music I'm going to get from you before I've even chatted to you. And I think your videos are incredibly well shot. Is that something that you feel is helping separate you from other people on YouTube, or is it just something that comes naturally to you?
I hope that it separates me. I mean, that's the goal, you know. And same with the graphic design on my website. You know, I want to have a full branded package that screams me, and I'm a little bit obsessive about aesthetics on everything in my life. My videos include, and it took me a couple of years to really cultivate that aesthetic on the videos, because I do all of the video editing, the shooting, everything myself, all the graphic work in there.
Wow.
You know, all the chords, all that I design in an illustration program because I wanted specific fonts for that, because that's important to me. It was a process in building all of that up, and the pandemic truly forced my hand when, you know, in the course of 3 days, an entire year of work was gone. You know, I'm typically playing. That's generally how I make most of my living, and I love teaching. I absolutely love teaching, and I was doing YouTube videos before, but I said, well, I guess this is all I'm doing for the time being. So let's make it good. I wanted something that I could be proud of. It's been a large learning experience for me, getting around video editing and illustration and all of those things. But I thought it was important to kind of, you know, cultivate an aesthetic so that when you look at my videos, you know it's me, and thus you know what you're going to get. I'm not going to tell you what the strumming pattern is, because I don't care. I'm going I'm going to break down how the chords function, and that's fine. You know, I certainly also cater to a very specific audience, not beginners, but people that my main goal is to con people into understanding music through the ukulele. This is like my massive goal, is to not teach ukulele, but to teach music as a whole. Because so many people take up ukulele as a first instrument and then want to transition to something else. And if all you learn is this is a chord shape and this is the strumming pattern, guess what? None of that translates. But if you learn how a chord is built, you can bring that to any instrument whatsoever. And that's important. Actually, something I'm doing right now is I've just finished mapping out a 12-part music theory course entirely based around ukulele. Instead of, you know, usually we conceptualize things on piano when we talk about theory. And I want to do it from a ukulele-centric standpoint. I've had a lot of people, especially on my Patreon, asking for that, because I give little bits of those things in my videos. But I'd love just a whole course for people that want to go a little bit further in music via the ukulele. I think that'll be a nice thing to have.
I think that's great, because I think the ukulele, you're right, it often sucks people in at the sort of bottom end of music, if you want to call it that. And I think it's great if you can then use it to try and install some theory with people, because a lot of people, they come to the ukulele, and certainly a lot of my students say, I've come to the ukulele because I can't read music and I don't want to read music, because they're scared of it. You know, something happened to them in school that made them think, music. And I think if you can then, you know, use the ukulele to get them into playing and then a bit of reading music, it's a great thing.
Absolutely. And one thing I always stress with my students is that, you know, when you're playing ukulele, and this goes for guitar as well for me, is that Western musical notation is not gospel by any stretch of the imagination. Like a lot of, I see a lot of people that kind of look down on tablature, and I go, well, tablature was invented for fretted string instruments before we had regular, like it's very important. It tells you exactly where to put your fingers. So like, you should learn to play, you need to learn to read tabs as well as notation, because they both give you different perspectives. And you know, and as someone that writes as well, when you're composing, you want to give people the most amount of information so that they play it as you intend, right? And that's hard. And I feel like just having notation can't do that. Just having tabs can't do that. But the two together give you a much better picture. So I think ultimately most people get to a place in their ukulele journey that they need it to really further themselves and to be able to communicate their ideas better with other musicians. That's always my big thing, especially with theory, is, you know, it doesn't make you more musical, but it lets you tell people what you want a lot better and a lot more succinctly. And that's important to have a means to communicate.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the great things about the ukulele is that it uses tab and music. It's the only instrument that does that. You know, if you're a classical guitarist, you tend to look down on tab, which is stupid because, like you said, it was around before notation. And I love the fact that with the ukulele, it's accessible because you've got the tab, but you've got the music there as well. So you can indicate to people, listen, this is your tab, but have a look at this. We'll slowly go through it. Now, in this wonderful episode of checking in with the ukulele sessions, this merger of two things, there's a question that I always ask people that I'd love to ask you. So you're going on a car journey, Christopher, and you can go with anyone, past or present. I want to know what car you're driving. I want to know who would be your passenger. I think I've got an idea on that. What would be on the stereo?
You'd be surprised.
Okay. And what
would be on the stereo? That's good. Okay. All right. So the car is easy for me because I have a dream car that I've always wanted. I will one day have this car. And that is a 1963 VW Beetle. But I want a red one, and I want it to be a convertible and to have a tan roof and tan interior. This is all very, again, back to I love aesthetics. So this has been a long running thing, but it's 63 one because that's Herbie the Love Bug is a 63 Beetle.
I had a red Beetle. I had one. I had my first car was
really?
a red Beetle. Yeah.
Oh man, I'm so jealous. Yeah. My mother had one before I existed. I'm like, why didn't you keep this? And she said, well, the floorboard rusted through, and I went to brake one time, and my foot went through. Stranded in Nashville or something. But one day I'll find one that's restored. So, all right, 63 Beetle. And actually, the passenger for me is a really easy one. It's someone I mentioned earlier, which would be Antonio Carlos Jobim. Oh. No doubt in my mind. I would love to have an afternoon coffee with that man and talk to him about composition. I view him as absolutely one of the best composers in the 20th century. I mean, the tunes that he wrote are the most beautiful melodies I've ever heard. And as I was mentioning earlier, the harmonizations just blow my mind every time I listen to the record of Ellis and Tom, Ellis Regina and Tom Joby, which I think is one of his best records. I always hear something new in the arranging and the production. I'm just amazed by it. So yeah, but we would not actually be listening to bossa nova on this car ride, though. I think that we would. I want. Can I have a live concert recording on the stereo? Is that do we have the technology to do that? Is that okay?
There's room in the back of a Beetle.
Okay, so it was in France in 2019, I think July of 2019. The Robert Glasper Trio, with Chris Daves on drums and Derek Hodge on bass, did a performance with Yasin Bey, Mos Def, the rapper, and I want to make Antonio Carlos Jobim listen to Robert Glasper's Trio with Mos Def, because it's just as good as the stuff he wrote. And it's just like this. I saw the concert. So this is finally where we're getting with jazz, with things like hip, cool, still danceable music, accessible to everyone. And I think Jobim had a knack at that as well. You're taking these super complex concepts. When you listen to the song, if you don't know anything about music, you don't think about anything. You listen to a Jobim tune, and it's, wow, this is just a really pretty song, right? And then you dive into it, and you're like, oh my God. And Glasper's Trio is the same thing to me. Like someone just off the street going in a club could listen to that music and be happy with it. And then you listen to like the voicings Glasper's playing all over the place, and the polyrhythms that Chris Tate does on drums. That man is ridiculous, the rhythmic concepts that he has under his belt. And it just is so reminiscent of actually what Jobim did, but in a very American-centric way. And I'm curious what he would think about that.
Yeah.
So as for where we're going, so that as a destination, that's the hard one. I want to get him out of Brazil. I don't want him in Brazil. I think we're actually going to we'll start in Barcelona, and maybe we'll go around the Mediterranean to like Genoa or something. I think we'll do a nice ride just around the Mediterranean Sea, and end up in northern Italy somewhere.
So cool, so cool. Yeah, fantastic. What a journey that would be.
Yeah.
The falling leaves drift by my window. Those autumn leaves of red and gold. I see your lips, those summer kisses, those sunburned hands I used to hold. Since you went away, the day grows long, and soon I'll hear old winter song. But I miss you most of all, my darling, when autumn leaves they start to fall. Since you went away, the day grows long. Oh, soon I'll hear old winter song. Well, I miss you most of all, my darling. Autumn leaves, they start to fall. Those autumn leaves, they start to fall. Those autumn leaves, they start to fall.
And now I get to take the reins and I get to ask the questions.
You're a judge.
That last segment was very awkward for me. You know, I'm not used to actually answering questions.
Yeah.
I'm used to talking incoherently for hours, but not answering specific questions. So, but now I get to grill Paul, which is something I've been wanting to do for a while. Actually, I'd love to start out talking about the arrangement that you just played of Autumn Leaves. I think that you and I come from two very different approaches to playing, and I'm actually curious about how you approach arranging tunes on ukulele, because there's obvious constraints there, and you're also a phenomenal classical guitarist as well. And do you arrange very differently for uke than you do for guitar, and do you feel that the two really inform each other to a degree?
Well, that's a good question. I can see why you were worried now. Are they all going to be that hard?
Yes.
I think.
Oh, they get harder from here.
You just started me off easy. I think with Autumn Leaves, I pretty much took the melody that you would sing, then put the chords behind it, and then merged the two together and came somewhere I'm always aiming for a Lyle Ritz kind of thing, but I never quite achieve it. In that he would do in certain examples, every chord he played had the melodic note in it as the main note. And I think there's an example of his Fly Me to the Moon, where literally every chord, almost on the top line, the melodic note is played. So I kind of aim for something like that, but never quite achieve it. So I end up with the melody interspersed with the chords, and then try and play them together in a seamless way. That tends to be my attack. That was certainly my attack on Autumn Leaves, whereas I get the impression you're more chord based. Would you agree with that? Look at me turning the tables.
Yeah. I thought I was asking the questions here, Paul. No, very, very much so. And I do much the same. The Lyle Ritz stuff is doing a lot of chord voicings that keep the melody on top all the time, which is obviously not always possible, depending how much range the melody has, which can be, one of those fun things about playing with octave displacement with the melody and things like that, where we're physically incapable of playing the melody what we would call correctly, and I love that about the instrument. But I also love to play with the melody and not play it exactly how it was. I mean, Sinatra was a master at not exactly doing the melody as written all the time. You think about his version of You Fly Me to the Moon. That's he always is playing around. So I feel like once you establish the melody, you have a little freedom to do what you want.
Well, yeah, that's interesting.
Would you
sorry, go on.
No, go ahead, Bob.
One of the things that I teach people when I'm teaching them to do sort of lead and rhythm, I often say to people that you don't need to play every melodic note. The brain does this wonderful thing. It's like you and I are having a conversation. If I miss out certain words, your brain fills them in. And I do that when I do these little sort of group sessions.
Absolutely.
I
have a version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow that I arranged, and because I did it sits really well in C, except there's one note you can't play because it goes too low in the range. But if you don't play it, it sounds like it's there. And that was the first time I figured out. There's years ago I arranged that, and figuring out that concept that the brain fills in the blanks and does it with harmony as well. We were chatting before about not having a lot of bass movement with reentrant uke and such, but the brain kind of fills in a lot of those partial chords. And even if you play, say, a G7 without a G in it, your brain goes, oh, it's a G7. We're going to go back to C, right?
Yeah.
It's something I love about uke, how you have to trick some things into happening.
I teach a version of Love Me Tender by Elvis, where I play the lead and rhythm at the same time, but I purposely miss out some of the lead notes, the melodic notes, but people's brains fill it in. And yes, you're entirely right. We use that to our benefit, don't we, really? When it comes to sort of arranging other pieces, I tend to take guitar pieces, classical guitar pieces. I then have a rough bash at just playing them on the ukulele the same as you would on a guitar, so just dropping the bass notes. If that works, I will stick with that. So for example, if I'm playing something in D on a guitar, I'll play it in G on a ukulele, but play it the same way. And then I will start to think, okay, so I can't get the bass notes. As a general rule, I will replace bass notes with chords. So if I was playing a classical guitar piece, and the bass is quite important for adding a pulse, for example, if there's a pulse on 1 and 3 in 4/4, on 1 and 3, I'll try and put a chord. And I would say that's a style that I pretty much stole from Colin Tribe. He's a fantastic arranger, and I kind of went down that road because I think it works. If I find that if I just pick up a ukulele and play a guitar piece and it doesn't work like that, then I'll start looking at other keys to put something in. It might be that then I'll get the actual sheet music and think I will actually play the notes on the ukulele and then work it out from there. Or it might be that I'll have to shift it up or down a little bit. It's unusual for me to change keys. I think in my new book, which is coming out in fall, with Mel Bay. I think that's got about 4 key changes in it, and I'm almost thinking of a couple of the pieces doing in 2 keys so that people can see this is the original key and this is the ukulele key that I think it works better in.
Yeah, because you'll get eviscerated by the classical guitar audience by doing things in the wrong key. You know, that's an issue. It happens in the jazz world as well. You play, I've called pieces and people call for they go, oh, we're doing it in F, right? I'm like, no, I sing. We're gonna do it in E flat. We hate you.
Yeah.
It's wrong. It's gospel. It should be this key.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because some of the Tarraga pieces, there was a Tarraga piece in my first book that I did, and it's known as Etude in E minor. And I put it in A minor, and then to call it Etude in A minor, you almost feel like a heretic.
Yeah. Where Smack's melody in F, not in F.
yeah. If he can get away with it.
You think things like that. I mean, yeah. I mean, well, and that's one of the things that I have always run into in you, because unless it sits just perfectly in the original key, you have to transpose to get it to fit right because of the limited range, and getting used to finding what those good transpositions are on ukulele is really a big part of playing the instrument, because we have good keys and bad keys, which every instrument has. Let's be honest. You know, guitar players love E.
Yeah.
I hate E. It's the worst key. I don't know why you guys play in that all the time. But obviously on uke, how often do we play a piece in E?
Yeah,
almost never. Right, because it doesn't work. We get C, F, G, B flats fits pretty darn nice, I think, on uke. Others might disagree with me on that one.
Yeah,
but again, just working within the constraints of the instrument, where when you're arranging for classical guitar, you don't run into those issues, right? So do you feel like that you have more freedom when you're arranging for guitar versus uke, or do you feel that uke presents you challenges that actually make you think more about the piece and how you're treating it?
I think there's more challenges in some ways on uke because, for example, you know, like we were talking about earlier, if you're doing a Bach piece on uke, that you got to think about it. It was probably originally written on a harpsichord, then somebody at some stage put it onto a guitar, and now I'm putting it onto uke, and other people are. And yeah, you've got to get around the fact that when it was written on a harpsichord or a Lutenwerk, you're talking 6 octaves, and you know, then all of a sudden you've got to cram it into 1 and a bit. I think when it comes to arranging on uke, I probably feel a little bit safer arranging on the uke than the guitar, purely because of what you said. I think sometimes in the classical guitar world, eyes would roll to the back of heads, whereas in the ukulele world, people are more accepting of it.
Yeah, and that's something great about the uke world, is there's less right and wrong in here, because we have so many things that are just not codified, because the whole pedagogy of uke didn't even start until the 20s, really. I mean, we were talking about the Kai book earlier, which is the first one ever published in 1913, but you don't see a lot of method books really cropping up till the 20s or 30s, where classical guitar technique goes back hundreds of years and has this vast repertoire. And there's a lot of right ways to play ukulele.
And they're still used. I mean, Carcassi, I can't remember whether it was Carcassi or Carulli's book, method for guitar. I think Carcassi Op 60 or whatever it was. It's still used. I still use it.
Yeah.
So there's all that history.
Yeah, that's the thing. We don't have many corollaries like that in the uke world, right? Like, you don't have those old standard pieces for repertoire, which is weird. And actually, I was talking to Matthew Quilliam a couple of weeks ago. I was asking him in the interview what he was studying at university, what was on his music stand. He goes, well, Paul Mansell piece is back there. I was like, oh, really? So this is it. You're creating the new standard repertoire for ukulele, which needs that. And Sam Muir, of course, needs a nod on that as well. She has a lot of amazing things going on. And new pieces, and Matthew himself is writing a lot of new pieces. And that's something that I love seeing. And you've actually just released an entire book of, it's all original pieces, right? The modern pieces for ukulele.
This book here, which is so it's 20 pieces that I wrote, and it kind of starts at it starts pre-grade 1, I would say. So really sort of the early pieces are accessible for people really at the early part of their ukulele studies, and then it goes
Yeah.
through to grade 8, so sort of more complex pieces. But that's been great fun. It was such a great fun thing to do, and that's just come out. And I tried to do a range of pieces. So there's pieces that are classical-esque. One of the pieces is called Homage to Corelli, and it's very Corelli-esque.
Yeah, yeah.
And then there's another piece, for example, that's called the Crag Rag, which is named after the ship Crag, which, as you know, brought the immigrants from Madeira to Hawaii, the first people who were then playing Rajal, before the ukulele even. And I'd say that's very much more in a ragtime kind of, almost Lyle Witz kind of style. There's flamenco pieces in it as well, and some jazz pieces as well. So I was trying to demonstrate that the ukulele can be really broad, and hopefully I achieved that.
Yeah, I know. I think you certainly do. I sat down the other night and played through a bunch of attempted to sight read till I got to some of the later ones. Went, oh no, I'm gonna have to practice a little bit. But you're right, and that's what I love. The first few pieces are like very accessible, you know, and I love that. But I do. Speaking of the names of the pieces, I do have a question about one of them, because I need to know. Waffles and deck chairs.
Yeah.
Why?
And do you know what? There's a funny thing about that. Someone noticed. There's so far I've only noticed one mistake in the book, because as I'm sure you're aware, when we do these books, there's always a mistake that comes out, and
Always.
Someone has noticed the mistake that on the video it's called Deck Chairs and Waffles, and in the book it's called Waffles and Deck Chairs. And do you know what? I wrote it when I came back from the beach one day, and it just seemed happy, and that's just it. I kind of just came up with that sort of whimsical thing that it made me.
You're just sitting on your deck, like feet up, eating a waffle. That's what I'm imagining? You have like a ukulele in your lap, just kind of playing, eating a waffle.
Yeah. People were feeding me waffles from between their toes.
Oh, this is like a Greek god kind of thing. Instead of grapes, you have waffles coming down.
Yeah, and they were wafting me with leaves, you know, that kind
of thing. Oh my. I'm in the wrong country. It sounds a lot more fun over there.
That's literally how my life is every day.
Just play a little bit of ukulele on the side, but it's really all about waffles and hanging out on the deck.
Yeah. Exactly.
What spurred you to write an entire book of original pieces? So you have a bunch of books out there doing arrangements of a lot of classical guitar music. You have and so why finally an original one?
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. So I've done a book of classical guitar pieces mainly that were then for arranged for ukulele. I've done a book, I think I've got it here, this book here, which this is like really easy songs, one chord songs and that. And then I did a book of duets with Tony Mizzen, and that again was classical pieces. And to be honest, they were driven by the publisher. The publisher pretty much said, you're going to do this kind of songbook that is aimed at kids. The book of duets was mine and Tony's idea. So the previous 3 books had all been via a publisher, Kevin Mayhew. And I kind of wanted to dip my toe into self-publishing. And I just thought I'd got a few pieces knocking around. Some of them were 30 years old that I wrote originally on guitar. And then I'd had a bit recently, to be honest, Sam Muir had quite a lot to do with it. I mean, that she's really pushing people to try and produce a catalogue of music actually written for ukulele.
Absolutely.
Selfishly, I wanted to be part of that. I thought, yeah, I'll do that. So I sat down and
as you should be.
Well, thank you. So yeah, I think interestingly, we were chatting about this the other day, because a lot of the music, there's a fair bit coming out now specifically for ukuleles, but publishers are still a little bit edgy about it, which is why a lot of it, and I understand that. I mean, the publishing world is changing dramatically anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I had the opportunity, and I was sort of, I mean, my publisher's great and I love working with them, but I had the opportunity to do it my way and do my pieces. So that's kind of where I ended up. And I guess we all want to get our music out there, don't we? And some people have been posting, it's only been out a week, and some people have been posting on Facebook themselves playing the pieces. And my word, that makes me so happy. I don't think people realise that when you see someone else play your piece of music in the smallest possible way, it makes you incredibly happy, whether they do it perfectly or whether it's their first attempt. It just makes me so happy that someone is happy to play something that I wrote.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. And even people playing your own arrangements is so nice to hear. And the one other thing I love about, especially the original pieces, when you get other people to play them, is when you compose a piece, you know what you want it to sound like generally, right? As we were talking about earlier with notation of, really being the goal of conveying that to the performer, and to hear other people's interpretations of your pieces is truly, truly magical. Because sometimes you hear someone play something and be like, man, I wish I had thought of playing it like that. And I wrote the darn thing.
Yeah, that's so true. Do you know what? That's already happened on a couple of pieces. There's one piece, actually, Homage to Crowley. And one of my students, I was teaching it, and they played it a slightly different way. And I was like, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah, you're like, darn it, that was good.
That was good. Yeah. It's like
and meanwhile, I was doing a piece. I was playing David John Roche's one of his new pieces a couple weeks ago, and I was, which if anyone hasn't checked that out, I got to get him on sometime to talk about ukulele composition. He's doing some great pieces. I played one of his pieces, and I changed a bunch of the fingerings. I added some campanella to it, and just some of the chord voicings I wanted to change a little bit. And before I posted it, I had this like fear in my head. I'm like, what if the composer gets mad at me for doing wrong to his piece?
Yeah.
And then we're talking about it as if like we want people to mess with it, right?
It's so true though. Funny if I played a piece by Cheyenne Galvez, and he's a great composer.
I love Chords pieces.
Yeah, and I played one, I think it was called Nana Paramea, and I added a couple of harmonics to it.
For the astronaut, that's the astronaut book,
that's
right?
It, yeah. And I mean, that's a beautiful
piece. It's my favorite of his publications.
It's great. It mixes jazz and classical. He's got, these beautiful chords in there. And I added a couple of harmonics, and I thought, I hope I haven't offended him.
So Jones just fun to mess with anyway. Just take his pieces, have liberty with them. He is such a prolific composer, though. The amount of work that he has put out in the past year and a half is mind-blowing to me. It's like he's composing a new piece every day. I don't know how he keeps up with it at all. Because I certainly can't. I have to like drink coffee, and that takes time, so I can't be composing pieces all day. But I want to hop back to a book that you mentioned a little bit about ago, and that's your 1 and 2 chord song book that's for teaching in the classroom. And you said that's something your publisher wanted you to do. That wasn't necessarily something that you came up with.
Yeah, I didn't come up with that. That was the publisher's idea. So after we'd done classical uke, after that had sold 5.5 million copies, they obviously wanted.
We should do another one.
Yeah, I wish it had sold that many. They wanted Kevin Mayhew, the publishers, are very much in schools, and obviously that's quite a big market, and they're sort of, they're a business at the end of the day, so they have to make money. And they saw a bit of an opportunity for a book. In England, there's no real standard book in schools yet. So
in the US either. I think Canada's the only place that really had it with the Doan method.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. So initially, I kind of wrote a book on fingerstyle ukulele, and they sort of looked at it and said, go away and do it again. So I went away and sort of came up with these songs. One of them, can you play me a C? Can you play me an F? Can you play me a G? Kind of thing. So they're all sort of teaching kids, and they're fun. And it was great to do because the engineer is a really, really good musician. So he did all the other instruments on it, and it came out really well. And it was fun, and it pushed me in a different direction because I probably hadn't written songs for 10 years. And as you know, in some ways, writing a 1 chord song is actually pretty hard.
Yeah, Yeah, it is. How do you make a catchy melody with only that much harmonic information? That's exactly why I wanted to talk about this book, is to talk about the compositional process of writing these tunes, because it's such a stark contrast to everything else that you
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
um, and what was your
Effectively,
thought process when you were doing this?
I mean, effectively, the process was the publisher laid out, they wanted it to move forward it start with one chord, then two chords, then three chords, so forward. So the book literally starts with the first song has one chord in it, the obvious chord being C. And as you know, it becomes fairly evident what the right order is realistically if you're thinking about the sort of
Yeah,
circular fifths or whatever. You don't want children playing a B flat to begin with, because it's just, it's going to annoy them and put them off. So it's got to be accessible.
yeah,
They then wanted initially the first song to be in 4/4, second one to be in 4/4, then 3/4, building up to the latter ones being in 6/8. So they'd given me a fairly clear structure and parameters of what to do, and then they just let me loose and said, go and write these songs. And that's odd, because previously, if I've been in bands, no one's going to turn around to you and say, "Here, mate, do something in 6/8." So to have that was weird. Your bandmate, when you're in a rock band, your bandmate's not going to turn around and say, "Oh, do you know what? Can you do something in E for next week?" So it was
yeah.
quite odd to have that. So a couple of the pieces I wrote with a colleague of mine, Alex Biggs. He's a great percussionist, great drummer. So we got together and wrote a couple of the pieces together. And some of the other pieces, I would literally just sit here with the two chords and then try and come up with a melody above it, sticking to those chords, try and get the melody as catchy as possible. And people have been really kind about the book. They've said, there's some real earworms in it. And I've had lots of people approaching me about whether there's going to be a follow-up, which I don't know at the moment, because, COVID has changed everything, and the publishing world is going through some dramatic changes. But that's a different story. But it was great fun to do, and I've like had videos of people in sort of Korea singing the songs and things like that, and going back, that's what makes it for me, that if a bunch of children or adults sing your song, it's the best thing ever, isn't it? That people are singing it and it's making them happy. We have this thing in England. There's this wonderful not-for-profit organisation called the London Ukulele Orchestra, run by Tara.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Lovely lady.
Tara, yeah.
Really well, yeah. And she sent me a message saying the other day they were doing something online where the children had to pick a song to play, and she said the majority of them all picked one of the first pieces from classical ukulele, and I was just, wow, that makes me so happy.
Yeah, you spend all this time writing and composing and arranging, and so much of it seems, especially in this period now where we're not teaching at festivals or playing live performances, having no feedback the vast majority of the time is so tough. And when you finally get that, oh my gosh, someone actually appreciates what I do.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah. And I think also the world that you and I operate in, the ukulele world, I think it's accessible because what you do here and what I do with the ukulele sessions, there's people that I've approached. Take for example, Kimo Hussey, one of my heroes.
Yeah.
The guy's an incredible player, and I just dropped him an email and said, Kimo, will you appear on the ukulele sessions? Within 10 minutes, he was back like, yeah, let me know what you want. Would that happen in the classical guitar world? Nothing against John Williams, I'm sure he's a lovely guy, but if I sent an email saying, do you want to come on, would he? I don't know.
Well, his manager might reply in 3 months.
It's not bothering me.
Yeah, no, that's something it has always floored me about the ukulele world, because I've only been here for really for a few years as my full-time instrument. And I've existed a lot in jazz festivals and folk festivals and things like that. And the accessibility of ukulele is flooring. And that's not just all the people who play, but so many of the professional performers are just such wonderful people. And there's no pretense. There's very little ego in the ukulele world, which is something you certainly don't run into in the guitar world, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Egos in the guitar world.
yeah, 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 exactly. It is so different. I think because it started like that, for me, people like Colin Tribe, Sam Muir, these are amazing players, and for me, I shared a stage with Sam not long ago, and for me, that is such a thrill. It really is, to play along someone like Sam, and you just get these opportunities, and I think that then sort of pyramids out, doesn't it? That I like to think that anyone that approaches me about any questions ukulele, and I'm so low in the ukulele pecking order, but so if anyone approaches me, I like to think, and I'll say it here, please do approach me. I will always answer questions about my books or anything like that, because it makes me happy that people care to ask.
Yeah, yeah. I think most composers feel that way, right? Like I just want just a little recognition means a lot. And some people are like scared to reach out, which
Yeah,
is funny, because I've run into the same thing, reaching out to some performers and them being like, oh yeah, absolutely, it's not a problem.
yeah,
And you think about, as you said, any other musical world, and it's almost unheard of, this sort of gatekeeping of classical music,
yeah,
especially,
yeah.
is something that maybe is slowly going away. We shall see.
Yeah.
Paul, is your education, was that primarily in classical guitar, and then you picked up ukulele afterwards, or did those two instruments evolve kind of parallel for you in
No,
your life?
completely separately. So I was late to the guitar. I picked up the guitar
Mm.
when I was 16, which is, I think, relatively late. I was incredibly lucky. Had a fantastic teacher at my school, a chap called Keith Learmouth, and got fairly good on the classical guitar. I don't mean as in I'm natural. I am anything but a natural player, but I think I had a lot of good teaching. I kind of, my schoolwork really suffered for it, but I had a lot of time to play. So it got to a relatively good standard relatively quickly through no natural talent. I think it was Steve Martin once said that obsession is a great substitute for talent. And that's what I had. And I was completely obsessed with it. So by 18, I was sort of grade 8-ish. And then after uni, I didn't do music at uni. I did marketing. I kept on playing, but it was always just in fun bands and that. And I didn't actually pick a ukulele up until I think I was about 40.
Oh wow.
So you're at this stage, you're meant to say, "Are you 40?"
Yeah. Oh, I mean, wow, you look great for your age.
Oh, thanks, Christopher. Yeah. So, and actually, prior to doing that, I'd had 10 years off from playing the guitar. Between 30 and 40, I think I only touched the guitar once. And then, due to a change in life, I had a business that I sold. I kind of needed a new job. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to become a musician. What's the worst that can happen? So I started. Maybe this is the worst that could happen. I don't know.
I mean, you could be destitute on the street, but besides that, it's all roses and rainbows.
Exactly. Yeah. So I started, getting back into the guitar with the aim of sort of becoming a teacher. And then Alex Biggs, who I mentioned earlier, co-songwriter, he sent me a picture of a ukulele in a window and said, do you know, what's that? And I ordered one and it arrived, a little Macala. It's not here. I still have it, a Macala Dolphin. And within 9 months, I'd done my diploma with Colin Tribe. And I must thank Colin, because he was very kind to me, and very nurturing. He kind of, I think he spotted what I wanted to do. And I was very pleased. We have this thing called the VCM, Victoria College of Music. So I did a diploma on the ukulele with them. And that then it all kicked off from there, really.
Yeah, there's something that really floors me about the UK is you have institutions that accept ukulele as a real instrument.
Yeah,
which
I
was talking with Matthew about this a couple of weeks ago, about how we're starting to get there. We have a couple degree programs now at major university. Berkeley has a ukulele major. University of Hawaii had one ukulele major a couple of years ago, but it's very rare where it seems. I don't want to say this, but I'm going to say it, that the ukulele is in fact more respected historically in the UK. than in America, where we've had some really distinct waves of it, where you've kind of had a nice even flow, and obviously an ebb and flow in there as well. But it seems to have always been a constant in the musical lexicon, in England and the UK. And why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I don't think we have a bunch of better players. I think, you've got some amazing players out there, yourself included. I mean, VCM realistically were the first, they went up to diploma level, but then you've got people like Sam Muir, who's doing a PhD, Dr. Uke, they call her. And yeah, Matthew's studying it as his first instrument at university. I don't know why that is, to be honest. I can't possibly answer that, but I'm incredibly grateful. We've got Trinity and RGT are catching up with VCM as well. And there's a couple of other exam boards as well. I mean, we still get it here that, if I say to someone, oh, I've got a diploma on the ukulele, they'll laugh hysterically and then say, oh, for a minute, I thought you said you had a diploma on the ukulele. So we still get
that is the appropriate reaction, right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, when I tell people I studied upright bass in college, I get the same reaction. Yeah. Why would you do such a thing to yourself? And I look back and go, I don't know why. It just seemed like the right decision when I was young.
Yeah. But I mean, realistically, in the States, it would be great to see it. I'll use the word legitimized. And, people like yourself are doing an incredible amount for that, purely by being such good players. But it would be nice. Canada's got the James Hill program, hasn't it? We've got the VCM.
Yeah.
It'd be nice to see something in the States. It's Berkeley. Is that the same as Berkeley Press? Are they the same company?
Yes. Yeah. Berkeley is where the original real books were written, back in the 70s. Berkeley College of Music up in Massachusetts.
Well, that's really interesting, because when I published Classical Uke, I approached 3 publishers. So this was my first book, which I never expected to get published. But I approached Jim Beloff, who the great Jim Beloff, who of course published Lyle Witz's stuff, and Tony Mizzen's stuff, and he was very, very kind to me. He came back and said, listen, I really like your book, but I'm not putting any more ukulele stuff like that out. But I was grateful that he spoke to me. Kevin Mayhew, who came back and said yes straight away, and Berkeley, who said yes. But I went with Kevin Mayhew because they had the recording studio. But that's interesting.
That's
Berkeley. Yeah, exactly. That's interesting that Berkeley obviously have such a history there. I wonder if it's get in contact with them.
And this is. And this is their second ukulele principal, I believe. They had one back in the early 2000s as well, that also majored on uke as their primary instrument, and in a jazz context over there for the most part, which is really odd to see that being legitimized as in jazz as an instrument. Where when I show up at jam sessions, people laugh at me. I mean, for various reasons. It's not just the ukulele. It's me walking into a room half the time. But I love to see that, because I want that to be more normal. And I encourage, a lot of my students, like, go out to jam sessions, go to bluegrass jam sessions. One of my favorite things to do on uke is go play bluegrass with a bunch of fiddle players and banjo players. And it's like, why not? It's just an instrument. We can do whatever the heck we want on it. But of course you get some sideways looks when you play ukulele. That's just life. But hey, it's the easiest schlep to and from the gig ever. So I'm never going to complain about this instrument.
Definitely.
Oh, Paul, at the end of all of my episodes, and since I got the second half of this, I get to use my ending on this, which is wonderful. I missed my introduction, my classic introduction, which no one else will miss. But at the very end, I always ask the person I have on to play us a little exit music. So first, I want to just thank you for taking the time. We've been talking for a while. This has been a great chat and really lovely. And I look forward to playing through some more of your pieces and working my way through your new book. So thank you so much for taking the time to do this with me. I hope that next time we get to do this in person, play a couple tunes and have some fun. And and laugh more about ukulele and how silly it is and how wonderful it is at the same time.
Yeah, that would be great. I know you said you're over in England, so I really look forward to meeting up. That'll be very exciting.
Yeah,
Yes,
we will make it happen.
Oh, sorry, I've played over you there. Typical ukulele player. Yeah, thank you for your time as well. It's been great fun. I'll play us out in that case.
All right. Yeah, man. You know the funny thing, Paul, if you just took that same exact piece and swung all the eighth notes, you'd have every Roy Smeck technique you ever needed. That's pretty much all it was. It was like he just stole everything flamenco and then played way too hard to create the sound that he did.
Perfect. Shall I stop the recording?
Yeah. Let's cut it there.